Hello and welcome. Today's project is all about the mindset change. Why you feel like you're stuck in this box and you're manifesting the same negative damn things over and over and over again. And really, how you can change your perspective over yourself and your symptoms and the situation that you're in and begin to manifest the things that you actually do want in your life. First thing is that I want to talk about the unconscious mind, and that the unconscious mind, the 95% of who you are, wants to run you automatically. It's like a computer that has programs on it, and those programs need to be updated and uninstalled constantly, right? You have to uninstall that outdated program and then update that damn program, right? Or you're going to be running on old patterns that just don't serve you. And those patterns keep bumping you into these walls, and that, well, you can break down these walls if you know what to do and you know the techniques and you know tools to help you, and you can see beyond the walls. You can see beyond the grass, right? Because that was my old self. When I used to suffer, I used to run into the same walls all the time. The same addictions used to hit me in the same place, the same behaviors, the same things I would say kept running me into the same damn problems. So that person, like my old self, has this laminated map of the world, right? It's laminated, it's just set in stone, right? But, you have to cut the damn lamination, and you have to take the map out, and you have to look at the map and say, oh, okay, I recognize, these are my patterns, right? This is what I'm doing every day. This is what I'm saying every day. This is what's causing me to run into these walls, and then start to reroute and redraw this damn map. So what's interesting about anxiety is that there's this part of the brain, the thalamus. And what the thalamus is it collects sensory information from the outside world and integrates it into the mix of your autobiographical memory. So when you do experience anxiety in that moment, what happens is the floodgate of your thalamus opens up. And then all that information that wasn't relevant before, all of a sudden becomes relevant. When you go for a hike and you suddenly realize that you're lost, what happens? You get the flood of anxiety, right? But then also, everything that wasn't relevant before becomes relevant. All that information starts to flood in. And that's what's going on with the thalamus. Another example is when you're reading a book, right? When you're focused on the words, the cars in the background are irrelevant. Your parents in the other room is irrelevant. The dog barking is irrelevant. All of these sensations and sensory informations from the outside world are not relevant, right? They're safe to ignore. It's safe to ignore those things and focus in. You have this tunnel vision of this focus that you're engaged in, but when you experience that anxiety, that fear, everything now becomes relevant, and you're in this heightened state of alertness. And what's interesting is that when you're in depersonalization, and depersonalization is when you're walking around stuck in this freeze response, this numbing response, right? All these different parts of the brain shut down, right? And you feel like you're just stuck in this numbing state where everything is just so overwhelming that you don't know what to do. Like you can't control your thoughts, you can't control your actions. I remember one time when I was crossing the street, when I was stuck in depersonalization, I was like looking at the ground, walking, like Like, I was just in this numb state, and like, so this car just drove right past me. I wasn't paying attention. I was jaywalking at a certain point of the road. This car went past me. I didn't realize that there was a car coming, and I saw the car and I was like, oh my God, I almost got hit by a car. But why don't I feel shocked about it? Why don't I feel any strong emotions about it? I still feel numb, right? And that's a good explanation of depersonalization. It's just that numbing. It's like you know you should feel something, but you just can't, right? You're in this state of numbness. And so what's interesting about depersonalization is that the thalamus is wide open when you're stuck in this depersonalization. There's all this information coming in, and it's just overwhelming to you. And so when you're watching TV and you're watching a doctor's show, you're so overly sensitive to the images of the hospital. You're so overly sensitive to somebody talking about cancer. You're overly sensitive when someone comes up behind you to say something to you. You jump and you're startled. You're just in this anxious state where the floodgates to your mind is just wide open, right? And so what I want to get to is that when you start to change your mindset, what happens is that you start to step outside of the domain of what has been known to you. So if you've been stuck in anxiety, in pain and suffering, suffering is what's known to you at this point. It's a pattern. Suffering is a pattern, right? And when you start to go this way and say, hey, you know, what do I have to lose by starting meditation, or by avoiding sugar, or by avoiding a negative friend, or by reading instead of watching TV, and starting to break outside of these old patterns that you used to engage in, is that you'll find that there are different feelings associated to these new ways of being. So now that you've started to walk this way, you're getting a new perspective of the world. New information is bubbling up to the surface because you have to venture into the unknown in order to gather new information, right? So since suffering is your known territory, right, you have to go into a different direction and start engaging in things that make you uncomfortable. So when I started to meditate, it was uncomfortable. I never used to do that before. I didn't want to be by myself in my own skin because I felt like myself was an unhealthy, anxious person that if I was alone in my own thoughts, it would be too overwhelming. So I had to get used to being with my own thoughts, because when I would be with my own thoughts, what would happen is I would discover parts of myself I never saw before, but also it was being more comfortable in pain, being more comfortable in that chaotic mindset, because I had a chaotic mind, right? Everything was just, I was not used to being with my own mind because I was always watching TV. I was always watching movies. I was always staying up late eating junk food, distracting myself, always on my phone. It was a constant distraction. And so when I started to limit those distractions and be alone, I started to realize I don't even know who I am. I don't feel healthy. I don't know what I really want. I didn't know anything because we don't spend quality time with ourselves anymore in an age where we're constantly being bombarded with stimuli. We don't know how to deal with trauma when it comes about, the death of a loved one. We don't know how to deal with anxiety because we've been practicing distractions all the time. So when I stopped distracting myself, I started to realize that I needed to, and also I felt like I wanted to be more independent and isolated from the superego of society, right? The superego of society is this underlying pattern that is built within society, that is regular within society, right? This, okay, a way of thinking. People tell you what to think. The news tells you what to think. I wanted to break away from distractions, but also the superego of what was happening outside, and be alone with myself, and then discover what I could possibly do to better myself. Because I spent my whole life quitting things when it got rough. I spent my whole life avoiding things. And I never could commit to anything. So it was through discipline I found that I could accomplish something worthwhile that I never thought I could. I never thought I could get to a point in my life where I could look in the mirror and say, man, I'm proud of myself for accomplishing this thing. I'm proud of myself for not going out with my friends and smoking weed and staying out till 2 a.m. and waking up at 5 in the morning and then doing something with my day. By the end of the day, I felt like I accomplished something worthwhile. And those feelings of accomplishment would activate the dopamine, and I would feel proud and good. Like I felt like I was getting somewhere I never thought I could get to. And so that's what I really want to emphasize in this video, is that when you change your mindset and you start to break out of old patterns, you start to see a different side of yourself that you never knew existed. You start to see a stronger side of yourself. You start to see somebody who could be in uncomfortable situations and survive those uncomfortable situations. And then you start to get braver when you see yourself surviving, and then you have a lot more self-respect for yourself, and you start to develop more teeth, and you start to manifest the things that you want in your life because you've decided to break out of those patterns. You start to break out of the box that you used to be in. And that's really, really important for just growing, because when you start to step out of the domain of known territory, new circuits in your brain activate, new neural pathways start to activate, because our brains are neuroplastic. That means that it has the ability to rewire itself, right? We can lessen pathways that were strengthened from this anxiety, this fear, or this lifestyle, these patterns that we used to run. And then we can strengthen new pathways that support this enlightened, strong individual that you really want to become. And I noticed that when I was changing, that good things started to happen to me. I realized actually that I was walking into less pits than I used to walk into, because I was becoming more self-conscious of myself. I started to say, but I started to see in my day-to-day life, hey, if I improved this thing, I could avoid these 5 snakes. If I could then improve this thing, I could avoid these other 5 snakes. And so all these 10 snakes already started to disappear from my life. And then I started to say, well, wow, my life has improved like 10% because I've avoided those 10 snakes. You see that in Groundhog Day, which I'll leave a link to my interpretation of Groundhog Day, which I highly recommend you check out. It's a 3-parter podcast, which I highly recommend you check out. But in that movie, Phil, each day that he's reliving, that painful day of just dread that he's reliving, he keeps stepping into this sludge puddle. And he's like, oh God, that's just making his day like 3% worse, right? And he's doing a lot of things. He's acting in a way that's producing many different painful situations for him. But as soon as he started to awaken and think, what could I do? What can I avoid today that could help me make the day better? He starts to pay attention to the sludge puddle. He starts to say, oh, there's the sludge puddle I used to step in every day. And he jumps over it now. And okay, so he jumped over the puddle. You might say, well, Brad, is that really going to cure my anxiety? Well, it's like, if you avoid 10 different sludge puddles every day, you're going to feel a lot better. You're going to manifest good things in your life because, well, there's 10 sludge puddles you didn't walk into today because you were more aware, you're more conscious of them. And if you avoid 10 sludge puddles every day, you will be in a totally different place in a year from now in your life, right? It's that awareness that I started to accumulate where I was recognizing, okay, if I avoided this thing, avoided going to smoke weed with my friend and avoiding McDonald's, and I avoided caffeine and these little things I started to chip away at, I noticed that, well, when I avoided caffeine, I started to feel like my system was getting a little bit more calmer. So that's my day getting 5% better, which is really good. And then when I avoided smoking weed with my friend, and then I started to feel like I was more productive, so that made my day 5% better. And then these things started to stack up on each other. And then in 2 months' time, I was like, wow, look at all the things I've done in 2 months, and starting to realize that and pay attention to how better things have gotten in my life. Absolutely important. And that's where I'm going to leave you on today's video. Thank you so much for being here. Remember to go check out the Anxiety Project podcast on this channel, but also go to Google Podcasts. It's anywhere that you listen to podcasts. So go check out. It's amazing, and you guys find it to be useful. And so I'm grateful, and I'm grateful for your comments on the podcast. If you have any questions that you want me to answer on the podcast, please leave them below or go to unpluganxiety.com and leave your questions. And on the website, you can also check out my recovery program as well. And lastly, do not let anxiety define who you are. I will see you on the next video, or could be a podcast. Bye for now. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and that bell so that whenever a new video of mine appears, you will be one of the first to know. Namaste.